Going through this small PA into our podcast recorder with just these mics. We don't have a room mic, so we need you to be extra loud. And then the way that this is going to work, essentially, there's going to be a few minutes of a bit of a panel discussion, and then it's going to open it up to audience questions. So when you do come up, if you want to have your name on the podcast, just use your name and say where you're from and ask your question, but make sure to articulate it loudly in the microphone so that it comes through on the podcast. So hopefully everyone's okay with being on a podcast. Make some noise if you want to be on. Bigfoot Field. Is that switch on for you? I don't see there's a switch. Oh, there we go. Check.
Check. I have an issue with being on the podcast. I want to be on the podcast. Of course, we're going to make this happen.
Okay, so you got a mic, and I guess we'll just switch off. I'm on the podcast every week. I don't need a microphone. And I talk kind of loud too, but we'll have this.
Probably the easiest thing to do is just like hand it back and forth. But so the magic of podcasting is that none of that ever happened. These people just walked in the room. I didn't warn you about any of this. So, ladies and gentlemen, from Finding Bigfoot, please make some noise for Cliff Barackman, Matt Moneymaker, and Ranae Holland.
It's town hall right now.
It's the best town hall. You guys are awesome. Seriously, this is great. You guys, this is my first Bigfoot convention ever. Aside from Finding Bigfoot, I was still working with all of my nerdy scientist friends and doing some TED Talks and some academic conventions, but Cliff and Bobo kept nagging me about all the kids and families, so I was glad to finally be here. So everybody's been so nice to me. Thank you guys all so much. It's great to be here.
You guys want to introduce yourselves? Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm Matt Moneymaker, and as they said, I was on the Finding Bigfoot show, as I'm sure some of you know, and I started a group called the BFRO during the 4 years while I was in Ohio, and after that, I think I came down to Kentucky a couple of times during that year, but I came back many more times after I had actually moved back to California. Was out a few times before we did the show, and then when we did the show, we were in Kentucky a few more times. Yeah, I've had a lot of experience in a handful of parts of Ohio, of Kentucky. And I used to fly into Lexington when I would go up to, for those of you who heard my panel thing about the Kentucky footage, it was funny because I was coming into Lexington, flying into Lexington when I would go up there. Anyway, so that's my connection to this place, and this is Cliff.
Yeah, whatever. I do these things all the time. It seems that at least half the audience here is familiar to me, and that's only because I can't remember the other 30% of you. I see you guys all the time because this is one of my jobs that I do, and it's a pleasure to travel the country and see so many familiar faces and so many smiles. What really touches me are realizing that you've invited us, the team, into your family's living room every week for years, for almost a decade. And it is so kind, and you guys are so gracious, and it's lovely to be back at probably my favorite event. It's hard to say because there's so many good ones, but God, CryptidCon is just amazing, I would say. The variety of high caliber guests, it just blows everything away. Tom Shea, of course, Charlie Raymond. I can go down and meet Seth Breedlove, Adam Davies. You just go down the list. There's so many people here that I'm not only privileged to call colleagues, but also friends. So I hope if you don't realize how lucky you are to be here, let me tell you, believe me, it is a fantastic event. And thank you very much for all your support, not only for us as individuals and as a team, but for the subject in general. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to answering whatever questions or whatever the heck Matt has, Pruitt here has in store for us. I don't know, he's nuts. We'll see.
should do some etiquette. Again, it's my first convention, be gentle. A proper introduction for me, I'm Ranae Holland, the skeptical scientist, the Ranae Sayer from the team of Fay and Cliff Barackman. You know, I just want to say a moment that we know that Bobo could make it. He's working on a project down there in Southern Oregon, and I kind of half mad at him because I thought it was going to be all four of us. So we're gonna. I'll be giving him a hard time because I know you're all telling how much you miss him here, but I'll be needling him for you. But I just have to say, everything that Cliff and Matt were speaking to, I have missed being out and meeting the people in the community. That's all I can say, you guys, especially COVID. You know, we're all being separated. It's so good to see you all, and I am stoked to be getting some more questions because I know a lot of you have stopped by and seen me already, but there's a lot I haven't seen yet. So bring it on.
I'm going to answer one question that I know we're going to get. We might as well answer that right off the bat. Is what's the plan for new episodes in the future? And the truth is, we haven't been told about any plans for any new episodes. We know that they'll want to do a special with us every so often, but right now, under the umbrella of the Discovery Network is the Travel Channel, and they have a Bigfoot show called Expedition Bigfoot. So they're kind of they're doing that for now. That's their Bigfoot show for now, and so I think both Cliff and I have done spots on other shows, always about Bigfoot stuff. Usually in the course of like a show that's general paranormal, where they do different kinds of topics, and if they do a Bigfoot topic, they'll get him or I. Although recently, Travel Channel was doing a Bigfoot, they had a show and they needed a Bigfoot person, and then they pulled in somebody from Expedition Bigfoot. And I'm like, okay, sure, go ahead. Bring in one of those guys, those Johnny-come-latelys who don't know nothing. That's cool. You want that. But yeah, we're doing stuff here and there, and I'm happy to be organizing BFRO expeditions in different parts of the country, and we've got already one scheduled for Ohio for next year, and I'm sure there will be one in Kentucky, and so in that sense, I was doing that before we did the TV show, and we're doing it afterwards, but I'll be doing these. Be going to the same places that Cliff is going to, probably not as frequently as you, but I'll be doing it at some point. So anyway, I wanted to proactively answer that question because I knew that would be like among the questions that would come up.
It's so hard. They're always wanting us to get the band back together. You guys have to realize, I'm going to speak for Bobo here. We needed that downtime. I needed that full year off to recharge. And it's like getting the four of us to coordinate a schedule is not easy. He's got a project going on right now. I have different stuff going on. These guys are busy. And it's true. This is one thing I say. Even if there wasn't a show Finding Bigfoot, those three would be running around the woods doing what they do all the time anyway. So it's good to be on a stage missing one. But I'm the drummer, just for the record. I'm the drummer. I'm Ringo.
Okay, well, do we have any hands of people who, if they have...
I think Crew was...
Yeah, I think they wanted to do a little bit of like a past, present, future discussion, and then we'll open up to audience questions. One of the things that I always found interesting, that I think the audience might find interesting, that I've not heard a lot of discussion about is, like Matt, you had actually there were offers coming in prior to Animal Planet, and there were things that were filmed that were maybe sizzle reels here and there, and it always seemed like you had a pretty strong vision of what you wanted, enough such that you knew that those other offers weren't quite the right ones to take and to commit to. So maybe the audience would be interested in hearing about that process and what it was about Animal Planet in that series that clearly was the right choice, right? It ran for a very long time. All these people are here. It's still in reruns, etc. So do you remember that process and what it was about that opportunity that shone brighter than the other ones?
I kind of don't want to talk about all that because it was a kind of a frustrating starts and stops, and it's insider Hollywood stuff, and it was I had done. I mean, I'll tell you about the previous series I did. There was a series that I shot in 2003, and it went on for a year, and it was kind of the precursor to Finding Bigfoot. It was called Mysterious Encounters with Autumn Williams.
Great, that was fun.
Yeah.
That was great.
And it was, if you've seen that show, you noticed it was very similar to Finding Bigfoot. And there was a lead, her name was Autumn Williams, and it ran for about a year, and it was a lot of pressure on her, because she was kind of the lead figure. And these shows are, working on these shows, it's pretty grueling. I mean, because you're up all night long, and then the next day you're working, and it can burn you out. And so then if you have which we didn't have to endure it, which none of the four of us was like the focal person of the show. So none of the four of us had to deal with that psychological pressure of like, it's all about one person. But it was that case with her, and it's difficult to appreciate what that's like when you're the lead person and the show is all about you, and because you know that this is like your big chance, and you want to present yourself and the subject a particular way, and you want to be respected, and especially if you're a female lead and you're a young, attractive woman like her, which they wanted to play that up a lot, and of course she wants to be presented as more respectable and not just cheesecake, and so that was a constant argument there, and it was very frustrating for her.
But it was a learning experience for you.
Oh, and it was a learning experience for me, but I got to enjoy like the Squatch without having, I was in the show too, and you could see me in the show, I was kind of like her assistant. But after a year of it, she just said, between just the exhaustion of it, physical exhaustion and emotional exhaustion, she just said there's no way she's going to go on and do another one. But it was a very popular show while it was on. We went to a lot of different places across the country. In the course of 1 year, I think we did 13 episodes, and there was a lot of search technique things that we got to use there that I think we carried over to Finding Bigfoot, or we decided we weren't going to use because I had already tried it and said this will work and that won't work, or this is going to be a logistical nightmare, but that was good. And it was during the filming of that show that some people came up to me and said, these expeditions that you guys, the BFRO, do, they say, we would love to attend one and we pay money to go on one, etc. And they were telling me how much money they pay, and I was just like, well, I think that could work out if there was enough people who were willing to attend one, because before that it was just people in the group, and we'd meet, we'd go together, we'd go places. And so that was helped start the BFR expeditions, which I ran myself, and went to all of them every month, and in the summertime a couple of times a month, all over the country. And so when we heard that, and then during the course of that, a guy came to me and said, hey, listen, I want to help you get another show. So I was working with some producers, guys in Hollywood who were taking me to networks and saying, we want to build a Bigfoot show around this guy, etc. And of course, we'd be going into Fox and HBO and all these different places. And of course, they were just like, Bigfoot? What? A TV show about, come on. These network people were just silly about it. Thought the subject was silly. They liked me, but they thought the subject matter is not something that there would be an audience for. They really believed that. And of course, once Finding Bigfoot's taken off, then I had some of those people contact me and wow, it really happened. It was good. It worked out for you. Or people who knew them. So with Animal Planet finally started looking or wanting to do, we heard they wanted to do a show. They were looking around for people to be in the show. So we didn't take the idea to Animal Planet. The producers who came to me and approached me, they wanted Animal Planet for them and Discovery, that was like cable shows, that was too small time. They thought the budget wouldn't be enough for these guys who were bringing me around, for them to get good producer fees. And I kept saying, well, why don't we take it to a Discovery or an Animal Planet? And they're like, no. And so eventually I'm just like, you know what, guys, I'm done with this. I'm gonna try and do this on my own. I'll take, if I'm gonna do it, I might take it to places that you guys don't want to bother with. Animal Planet, then they decided they wanted to do a show. They started looking at initially on YouTube to try to find, they were looking at people who were on YouTube talking about Bigfoot stuff, and I wasn't on YouTube. And I know, Cliff, none of us were on YouTube at that point. But then they started talking to other Bigfoot researchers, and other Bigfoot researchers said they should come and talk to us. And they found Cliff independently, and they found me, and it all kind of came together.
I think what the timing on that was, I think you and Bobo were signed on, and there was like this 9-month process, so Matt, obviously, and then they had Bobo, and you worked with Bobo, you had experience, and they were just signing on Cliff, and there was this dance to find, they wanted a woman.
Yeah.
And they wanted credentials, somebody, some scientific or degree to have that. I don't know, did they want a skeptic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They wanted somebody, female, skeptic, scientist who was in the BFRO.
Yeah, so what I remember is here, since we're at a panel, I'll give you a little blurb here on Matt. So Matt, who's, this is circa 2009, 2010, and Matt one day just wants to be my Facebook friend. And I'm like, where's Matt coming from out of nowhere? Like squeaky, I met Matt because I wanted Bigfoot stories where I did field work. It made me feel close to my dad. Matt and I had probably in person met maybe once. Twice at most at this point. Otherwise it was all, he would let me log into the database to hear reports where I was doing field work, which was a couple times a year. I mean, it was I jokingly wink and say we had an online relationship. So Matt, out of the blue, Facebook request me, I'm like, what's this about? He was going after my fieldwork photos. And then one day he's like, hey Renee, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm going to the doctor's appointment. He's like, want to be on a TV show? And I'm like, or what? You want to go to Alaska? And I'm like, well, it's my favorite place. Yeah. And he's like, we're filming this pilot. And I'm like, no, thank you, sir. I'm a young scientist. I didn't want to be connected to that. And then the next phone call from me was a few weeks later. Matt had surreptitiously had the production company, and you had Todd, who is the production from the network, on the phone call, but he's calling it just as Matt. He's like, just go on with his Matt. He was Matt me again, and I was like, Matt, what part of no do you not friggin' understand? And I was like, hello, Renee. And I don't realize I'm on this whole group call, and that's really, for me, was the beginning of that.
Yeah, and so Renee was one of, they had this very strict criteria, and she was one of the people who fit it. And so I kept sending them demos, and it was hard because I would approach these women in the group and say, can you put a demo tape together so I can pitch you for a show? And none of them really wanted to do it, including Renee. And so I'd have to talk them into doing it, which is bad because obviously not all of them are going to be on it. So I'd have to convince them to do it. They didn't want to do it. And then knowing that for almost all of them, I'd have to be calling them back and saying, no, they don't like you. And so that was tough. But eventually, of all of them, I knew Renee was probably the best one. I mean, I knew she could, whatever. I mean, I had to think about the experience with Autumn, how worn out Autumn was after just 1 year, meant, psychologically, physically. And I told the network, I said, I'm really concerned about that we have, one female, 3 guys. It's going to be, she's not the lead, but it's still going to be all this pressure on her, whoever the female lead is. And I said, of all the women I know, Renee's going to be the one where, she's going to be the last one to get worn out. I mean, the rest of us will fall apart before she does. And so they believed that after a while.
I wasn't gray until the show, and then they had to start coloring my hair because it was going gray fast being in the car with those 3 guys. I joke. I will say this, one thing that meant a lot to me, and I think a lot of people is in the Bigfoot community. I still to this day, I don't believe it's an undocumented, I won't say discovered, an undocumented biological species recognized. I think it's somebody, and I love that you guys call it Bigfoot Beyond Cliff, because to me, Bigfoot is something that is beyond the realm of science. I'll just leave it at that and discuss. But the beauty of it was here's these 3 guys who I don't know, and I'm stuck in a cast car traveling the country, the world for that matter, in the cast car. And these guys are full-on nerds. If there was no Finding Bigfoot, those 3 guys would be doing what they're doing. They still are, right? And we would do our filming sessions, and then we'd get to go home, and see our families for a week, and then back on the road and this grind for 10 years, as you guys know. So we'd get back in the car, and in the beginning, you guys, they'd be talking about everything that's going on in the Bigfoot community, and then I'd be in the back seat, and I'd look up from my phone, and there'd be this hesitation for a moment. And it was like, what happens in the cast car stays in the cast car. And I remember Cliff looking at me one time when I kind of had the look of approval, like, I'm not going to say anything that's going to stay in the cast car. And I think that's when I knew I was accepted. I felt that I'd be wrong, but the skeptic will at least hold the secrets, and that's when I knew I found my brothers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and yet, like you said, it starts out with a free trip to Alaska, right? And it's like, because most things that get greenlit don't even get made, and then most pilots that get shot don't go anywhere, and then most things that air don't get renewed, and now you've got 10 years behind you with that. So I guess that it would have been hard to anticipate that it would have turned into all this, but
I was supposed to go to grad school. I was all funded to head to Oregon State University. You know, we were shooting a pilot. In fact, Todd Miller said, you know, pilots are a dime a dozen. It's a free trip to Alaska, my favorite place, a little bit of money for a poor college student, you know, and I'll head off to, well, I'll go to grad school after that. And then when we filmed it, then I was like, I had to make a lot of phone calls quickly.
And I know, I guess I was reluctant a little while ago to even talk about all this stuff because I thought like the behind the scenes stuff of the show is kind of like, you know, it almost like, I don't know, I would just think it kind of like dulls the magic of the show, but I guess it is kind of interesting. But one, I guess one point is about the Alaska thing. I remember the moment when we were there and we had been there for several days and we had been filming scenes for the pilot, and at one point they came to us and they said, okay, they're going to give you a time slot of like 9 o'clock on Monday nights. They're talking about that, and I was so blown away because I'm like, they're already. I mean, we're here in the middle of shooting the pilot. But what happened was they were sending every day from Alaska. They were sending back what are called dailies. And in the TV or film, dailies are whatever they're filming during that day, they're sending back to the studio, and in this case, they're sending it back to the network to letting them see kind of the raw footage to give them an idea of what they're gonna get and for them to make decisions on whether or not they wanna go forward. So they're making decisions about the pilot while we're in the middle of shooting the pilot in Alaska. And so while we're up there, they told us they saw the dailies from us up there and they just loved it so much. They're like, yeah, they're gonna put you on 9 o'clock on Sunday night. And I remember I was speechless, and I was like, oh my God, they're giving us Sunday night at 9 o'clock on Animal Planet? I said, you guys, this is gonna happen. This is gonna be a big deal. And it was, but that was the moment we knew when they came and told us that time slot, and that they made the decision before we had even finished filming the damn pilot, just for the dailies. And then, as it turned out, they, I can't remember exactly what the reason was, but they didn't turn that. They had us go back to Alaska later on to the same place and shoot more stuff.
Oh, I remember that. So we shot the pilot in, I want to say May?
June.
June,
Right after I got out of school.
June of 2010 is when we shot the pilot. And then we started filming the initial. They're like, okay, the short script, and that's February 2011, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and then Oregon, Washington in that order. And then they needed to have the 6. So we needed to have it kind of fit in the format. That's why we went back to Alaska, hence the branding of putting glasses on me and coloring my hair. And that's why I'm wearing the goofy hat for that whole key art that goes for Alaska. That's why we went back to blend it.
Yeah, the first episode we actually filmed as a true season in February of 2011 was the North Carolina episode.
Yep.
And I remember Brad Coolman, the owner of the production company, we were being watched by the owners of the production company at that point. And for good reason, we were uncooperative. But I remember we were in a town hall or something like that. I remember Brad comes out of that janky hotel room that we were in, and he says, okay, well this, then this, there it is. And he threw his arms up wide. There's the format. There's the format. We were actually filming without really a solid plan, just trying to make things up as we went along.
Just crazy.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
We were doing 3 to 4 night investigations a week, and I remember that from Avalon, North Carolina, and every night we were staying out. I remember it was 4:44 a.m. We would get back to the hotel room. 3 to 4 night investigations per episode. I mean, this was just like, I was like, I'm gonna blow up. I mean, this is like insane. This is crazy. It's untenable.
It was grueling. It was truly grueling.
Yeah,
especially that first season.
And in that first season, is these guys who had all their Bigfooting experience they've done with this, mysterious encounters, and Cliff on his own. It's now this clash of the crew, i.e., the film crew following as you're looking for Bigfoot. And let me tell you, that is a show in and of itself. That is a behind-the-scenes show in and of itself. The power struggles, and then I do remember, the end of season 1. We're in Florida. The order that we shot it was different than how it was released and aired. But I just remember Bigfoot and Beers, the beginning of what was going to be season 2 for us. It was a coming together of Discovery saying there was this compromise. Let us have somebody camp so we can truly squatch as we travel.
Yeah, I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but TV is largely false, It's a shallow, superficial medium at best. And we're doing the best we could to do real Bigfoot stuff. And there's light issues, we don't want lights being shown, and there's noise, and we're going to be quiet. And basically making a TV show is exactly what you don't want to do if you're going Bigfooting. And it was extraordinarily frustrating for all of us, and we yelled at them, they yelled at us. We were very uncooperative, and so were they, because they needed TV and we needed Bigfoot. And it came to a head for first show, second season, as Ranae was saying, the Mackenzie episode. Basically, the network executives had to fly out to the woods of Oregon to calm the Bigfooters down. So we would work with these people, and the Animal Planet was 100% behind us. The production company. We understand exactly what they need. They understood what we needed. They were very, very accommodating to us. And it was a fantastic opportunity for us, because that's where we got this idea that, okay, you're making TV, but you cannot hoax us. You cannot coax us in the line. And I can't speak for any other shows, because I know Finding Bigfoot better than anything. Yeah, sure, here's the truth, guys, secret. We didn't have to take a helicopter to get to the final night investigation spot, right? That's TV. But when it came to Bigfoot, we never lied. We never lied about, we could be wrong, I'm 100% open to being incorrect, but we never lied about stuff that we heard, stuff that we saw, stuff that we thought, and other shows, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem like TV's like that to me, And it was because of that meeting, it was because of the combination that Animal Planets and Discovery, their parent company, and the production companies, we met them halfway. I was a 5th grade teacher. I understand a good story hook, right? I think we all understand that, and that's cool, and that's part of the fun of watching TV, going on adventures with 4 nerds. Or 3 nerds and Bobo. And that was part of the thing, that we had to understand how the TV thing worked a little bit more, but they had to understand that. And I remember standing up and yelling at Keith Hoffman, who would later become a very good friend of mine, our executive producer.
Yeah, I'll give him a kidney. I mean,
he's amazing.
The production and crew people we have a road family.
Yeah.
To this day, I don't see these guys for a long time. We go to shoot this special episode that we shot, and it was just like old times right there. Absolutely. Yeah. You were saying.
I remember standing up and yelling at Keith Hoffman. It's like, I've been Bigfooting for this long, and I will be Bigfooting for the rest of my life. I'm not gonna, and your show's going away in 4 or 5 years, no matter how successful it is. I am not gonna lower our standards for your stupid show. And he goes, who's asking you to? And later I adore Keith.
The production company.
Well, they needed TV, and whatever. But we had a fantastic compromise, and we did not compromise the subject, which is the most important thing. Sasquatches, I'm sorry, Ranae, are in fact real. They are in fact real, and they deserve the subject deserves the respect. That I just don't see a lot of productions giving. So whatever that's worth, I'm very proud of being on Finding Bigfoot for that reason.
Yeah.
So wait, if I can touch on that, Matt. I'm so glad that you bring that up, because there are these two things that I see, you know, being the skeptic, which is not a sin, it's being a skeptic, which I can try. You know, I'll get people all the time that just, well, here, oh, you guys, they want to chill, they think everything's a Bigfoot. It's about TV. They don't see, oh, no, that's this. Oh, that's that.
Right.
They're only going to see when you're reacting. And the other thing that I speak to, and like Cliff said, there are a lot of scripted shows and other shows that are doing something else. It is written into our contract, cast and crew. Anybody fakes anything on our expeditions, they're out. And it has actually been enacted.
Which means, not us, but the producers and the crew and stuff like that, like throw a rock because they're tired of waiting around for us, you know.
And it actually was enforced. I won't say when, but it was, one thing happened, a ranger was with us at a location, saw that somebody had been making noise while we were out. That person was on a plane home the next day.
And that happened
And I
more
nearly
than
believe
once.
that, and I stand by that. And that's something I take pride in. I mean, sure, maybe for trying to hoax us we weren't aware of, but we're out there doing the whole thing. We were giving that pride of going out and trying to find that for the people sitting at home in their couch who can't get there and have that experience. I mean, and I stand by that, and that's something I'm very proud of.
Yeah, I still remember the kind of faces and looks, because so many times we were going places, and if people, just bystanders, if they were watching what was going on, and that'd be Alaska, North Carolina, they were seeing us all rolling, and they just were seeing yelling and screaming, and just like, oh my God, these big, loud fights about this and that, and I remember one of them was, we were in North Carolina, and we just kind of laid down the law, and they're like, the producers, of course, they're expected to have control and kind of define what's going on. I mean, that's what they're kind of expected to do, decide this is going to happen and that's going to happen, etc. And we just kind of, all the crew, I mean, the cast got together and just say, no, you don't understand. We're not doing your show. We're doing our Bigfoot thing, and we're letting you film it. So get used to that. And that was, and you don't get used to that, we'll walk. And so then they just kind of, like, I guess there's nothing else. I guess they got to do they got to do it that way.
And then when we would try to get production members, that's why that we had a true goat family. We had to train them to be Bigfooters to come along with us. There's roles to be served. You can't just fly into another town, pick up some PAs who know how they're going to fit in. And it became a rolling, traveling expedition of a tight family.
But it was the production company. I mean, for all the squabbles that we would have along the way, it was the production company's idea to do the town hall meeting. And I remember when we were on the conference call, and then it was Casey Brummels who said, okay, one of the things we're going to do at each one of these places we go, we're going to do a town hall meeting where we're going to bring in the witnesses and everything else. And I remember just saying, yeah, I thought that was the great idea. I just said, oh, we're really going to do that? Because I didn't even calculate, because all I knew about the production company was they had done Destination Truth. I mean, this is the production company of Josh Gates. So they had done, and before it was Josh, it was Destination Truth. And Destination Truth is maybe not an appropriate name for the kind of thing they do in the show.
Entertainment?
Yeah. And so we kept thinking, if you try to make this like Destination Truth, we are not going to go along with that. But when they said they wanted to do a town hall, I was just ecstatic, because I knew one of the things that I could help with in that regard is the BFRO database. All the sighting reports in there would help it, so they'd have a whole lot of people that they could contact in every state, witnesses, etc., that they could call up and say, hey, come to this town hall meeting. And then on top of that, they could advertise. They used Facebook and local radio stations, etc., and they could make sure that we had a whole bunch of real good witnesses in pretty much any place that we went. And that's what other TV shows couldn't do. So Expedition Bigfoot could not do a witness-based show because they didn't have a big, long database. And it's because none of those people have been doing Bigfoot stuff for very long. They kind of they only got involved in Bigfoot stuff. I mean, those guys got involved in Bigfoot stuff because they got involved with our stuff. I mean, Bryce was he was just somebody who was a guest on our show, and that was his first, not Bryce, Ronnie But anyway, we went on it just but we had been doing this stuff so much longer. And you could tell kind of in the chemistry of the show, none of those people had ever been working together. But I knew Ranae, and I knew Cliff, and I knew Bobo, and so I think you could tell in the show that we all kind of knew each other before we started doing the show.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about trust, not only between the cast members, but also the production team. And we eventually achieved that, and I think in a very wonderful way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it with the network was kind of like talking to the production company, because network and production, they know TV, we know Bigfoot. And I think the network is like, hey, you know what? These guys are weird enough. Just go film them. Whatever they're doing is going to be a great show. You know, just like, let them do they're so eccentric. This is going to be great. Don't worry about that. And it worked out.
Yeah, and that was that great part when we started. We got to send that person out to go camping, and that to me really was another thing that was so amazing. So yeah, what a crazy path, you know, as previously as it went. We all came back full circle. I only have a blood sister, and I wound up with 3 brothers all of a sudden. It's crazy.
Excellent. Well, we just crossed the 35-minute mark, so I think we're going to open this up, the remainder of this, to audience question and answers for the next half an hour, however long you guys feel like going. So again, this will be on the podcast. So if you want to be heard and say, you know, your name and where you're from, just make sure you articulate into this mic. If you don't mind being on Bigfoot and Beyond with Cliff and Bobo. And so probably the easiest thing to do would just to be to line up here. Whoever has questions, just come on up.
I'll tell, while we're waiting, I'm gonna tell one story that I think is kind of pertinent. I'm just thinking whether or not I should tell that story.
When in doubt, don't.
I'll tell a different story. But about one of the criticisms that we would receive was, we'd say criticisms, they say, oh, you guys go out in the woods and everything is a Bigfoot. And of course that was so frustrating, because if they were with us while we were out there, they knew that 99.5% of things, every minute we'd hear something, we'd like immediately go, yeah, it's a coyote. Yeah, that's an owl. Like we hear something, owl, coyote, this and that. And the producers even said, hey, listen guys, you can't do that. If you hear something or we get a sound, don't immediately say, oh, it's just a rat. Or it's just a this or that. It's just like, leave it open for a let it go, because of course that's where they want to insert the commercial break. Where we hear someone say, what's that? Then boom, you're off to the commercial. So then you can, hold your attention, so you can come back and then you say, so they just say, give it a pause. And because we got coyote.
These two would go, why is it that the 3 Bigfooters are like, they heard some, they're not saying anything, and it's like the scientist is, the skeptic is finally the one who's going to react, and it's like, because they're not going to react until they hear a Bigfoot.
So most of the time, we were, nearly all of the time, we were hearing sounds and identifying, and then every so often we'd be like, oh, did you hear that? What was that? Oh, listen to that. And of course, it's those little pieces that they strung together for the episode in the night investigation, and that's all you would see, because they're not going to include us going, oh yeah, here's some coyotes over there, oh yeah, I got them over there, they put maybe a little bit of that, but the most of it is just the part that like got, whoa, what was that? And so it gave the impression that as soon as we get out in the woods, the very first thing, like every single thing we're hearing, we're marking on saying, oh, that might be this and that might be that, and it was exactly the opposite of what it was. And so people just don't understand editing. If we're out for hours and hours at night, through the night, and you're only seeing 4 minutes of that, then it's obviously very selective, and it's obviously the highlights of of those 4 hours compressed into 4 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead and ask your question.
Right, I already introduced myself to you fellers, Charlie Sanzo, and paranormal specialist, cryptozoological investigator, etc., etc. Anyway, my question is, what is your best proof for Sasquatch, like your very best video? like in my opinion, I think it would probably be the one in Florida with the one that goes behind the tree. But what do you think? Which is your best evidence?
Got it. Okay. What do we think is the best evidence for that we obtained during the show?
During the show.
Yeah.
See, that's a different question than what the best evidence for Bigfoot would be, I think.
Okay. Well, you can answer either way.
Yeah, well,
Very, very briefly, I think the best evidence for Sasquatch is kind of like asking which of these puzzle pieces shows the kitty in the mug best. You know, like imagine like a big jigsaw puzzle, and you bought it, you saw the box, it's going to be a kitten in a mug, right? But which one of these one pieces shows that best is kind of what that question is to me. What piece of evidence is the best piece of evidence for Sasquatch? Whereas I think that to really understand it, you need more of a larger perspective on it. You need to see how the evidence fits in with other pieces of evidence and how they're all in congruence internally. And like one simple example of that would be the flexibility of the mid part of the Sasquatch foot, which is a non-human trait. It's a primate trait. All other living primates, all other great apes, and most other extinct hominins, or potentially still alive hominins, have that feature. So that was first described and made public to the Bigfoot community in about the year 2000 when Dr. Jeff Meldrum published a paper in a journal about it. But yet you can see that same feature in 1958, the Jerry Crew footprints and the Patterson-Gimlin footprints and footprints that were found and cast by various people at various times, even to this day. I cast footprints myself in April that shows that same feature. So no matter where, no matter when, that same feature is there. But the way that puzzle piece fits in is the Patterson-Gimlin film. You can see her foot, the Patterson-Gimlin film subjects, you can see her foot flex at that spot in the film. So that's an example of two totally, apparently different pieces of evidence fitting together congruently. You can also go into behaviors like the historic newspaper accounts from the 1800s describing known ape behaviors that weren't described until the 1960s, 1970s when Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall and those folks were doing those sort of studies in Africa. But yet Sasquatches were reported doing those same behaviors in the 1830s or something like that. So I think the best piece of evidence isn't a soundbite, unfortunately. I wish it were, because I get asked that question by reporters and stuff all the time. The best piece of evidence is really the larger perspective that you get when you stand back 10 or 20 feet and you look at the puzzle as a whole instead of as a piece.
And to go along with that, it's a little bit like prosecuting a legal case. You're a prosecutor, you're presenting a case for something, and it's like asking a reporter asking, well, what's your most persuasive piece of evidence? And the prosecutor would say, well, it's one little piece by itself is not going to win the case, and one piece by itself is not going to persuade the jury. It's all the interlocking pieces together. It's when you present the whole picture, you put them all together, and the jury of the family says, okay, well, that's overwhelming evidence. If you only had one little thing, you wouldn't prove your case. So that's that. Okay, so we got a line of people behind you. We got to take the next guy.
thank you.
Thanks, John.
you. Give him a hand. Give him a hand.
Hello, my name's Max. I'm from Frankfurt, just 25 minutes from here.
We were in Frankfurt.
Oh yeah, I think you all were the.
We
that
did
was
a town
last
hall
year or
there.
something, yeah. My question is, what was your all's favorite episode to film?
You know, for me it kind of goes, there's actually different ones. So it's like, I think back of some of the favorite people I meet stand out. One thing that stands out for me is being in Virginia and having a father come up and he's carrying his two daughters, and I realized what our team was doing was me being a little girl with my dad back in the 70s watching In Search Of and having that special connection with my dad and Bigfoot, that we're that next generation. So there's those people connections I made with the 10 years across the country. Then I think of like amazing food, and there's some that goes on, and then I have to think of amazing landscapes. Well, one of my all-time favorites was I have always wanted to go to Tibet and Bhutan. So when we went to Nepal, I went early. So I spent weeks there. So I went early, I went backcountry Nepal, then I went to Tibet, and then I went to Bhutan, and I came back. And it was interesting that everybody calls it the Yeti, right? But it's actually in Bhutan, it's the Mete. In Tibet, they have all of its names for it. It's a part of their culture, again, speaking to the congruency of not just the physical pieces that Cliff was talking about, but being a part of cultures that continues across the world by indigenous peoples. What was amazing to me, one part is that on the show, even though I may not believe it's a biological undocumented species, I believe that there's our spirit, our soul, our energy, if you will, our physical body dies, that our spirit goes somewhere else. That's the belief of most of the people, indigenous peoples there. That's never talked about in the show, and I remember when he was mentioning Keith Hoffman, our showrunner, I was like, Keith, they talk about it here, it's part of the culture, can I reference that? No, you're the skeptic. So I gotta say, for me, the fall was an amazing one. And then also, I have to say, being with Bob Gellin down at Little Creek, riding horseback with Bob down to the site, first time he's been back there, those are two things that made it come back perfect.
And my answer will be one word, and that is Australia.
Australia. Besides the Gimlin stuff and like all the bucket list things, like going to the Bottle Tree Island thing from Legend of Boggy Creek, and you know all these things I was watching as a kid and everything, you know. But I started getting really concerned about my bucket list because that was getting shorter and shorter, which I guess means my demise is nigh.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Layla. I'm originally from Texas. First, I want to say thank you for your authenticity. Meeting you in person and seeing that your personalities and discussions are exactly as you portray them in the show is great and leads credence to how genuine that all of you are. So thank you for that. And my question is, what are each of your individual opinions on the future of research with technology and new videos and new evidence emerging?
Well, I mean, there was a big leap forward when the internet came around. And that was a revolution in itself in that we were getting, because, I mean, it'd be hard to, I mean, if you're a Bigfoot researcher and you're not as old as we are, you wouldn't remember, well, what it was like before that. There's probably 3 times as many people in this room as there were like real, active Bigfoot researchers, and not even in the field, just people exchanging information was maybe a dozen people across the country at most. I mean, we're talking like in the mid 80s. And we knew them all, and we'd get information, but the information sometimes there would be newspaper articles, and you would just hear things through the grapevine, and you were stoked if you heard about a report that was as recent as 2 years ago. And then when the internet came along and it allowed us to get reports directly from the witnesses and from all different parts of the country, and a whole lot of information that way, because it just kept coming in, and that was a huge revolution. And then I think probably the next big leap forward came after the TV show started, after Finding Bigfoot came on, because the Bigfoot researchers knew there was reports coming from all these so many different states. Not all of them, but most of them. Any state that had forests with deer, let's say, which is almost every state, has at least, I mean, do you think, except for Hawaii, can you think of some state that doesn't have some portion that has deer? Even Nevada has parts of it where there's mountains and there's deer. And so there's habitat for them in almost every one of these states. So the Bigfoot researchers knew there was reports coming in from everywhere. But the public didn't know that. Then when the TV show came on, we were able to we showed that in Mysterious Encounters to a degree, but that was on this Canadian network, Outdoor Life Network, which not everybody had. How many people remember OLN? They used to show the Tour de France bike race, and that was kind of their claim to fame. So OLN, like you would, in some parts of the country, it would be part of a basic cable package, and other places nobody ever heard of OLN. So it didn't really get out. But when our show came on Animal Planet, that was then a big, I think, revelation to people around the country. It's like, wow, Bigfoot isn't just in the Pacific Northwest. And then they started to understand the idea that there isn't just one Bigfoot. You know, which was another kind of thing of the raise the awareness that no, this is not a phantom thing that pops up here and there. These are like animals that people see, and sometimes they see more than one in the same place. But these are animals like others, except they're a lot more rare, and they're very elusive and they're very smart, and so as a consequence, people just see them occasionally because they're active mainly at night, Anyway, so that was the big leap forward, and a big leap forward. And I think now, probably the next big leap forward is probably going to be a technology-related thing based on people have smartphones, so they can. And the limitation with smartphones, as opposed to the era where people had camcorders, is smartphones don't really zoom in very well. And so many of the sightings that people have are not close up, but they're a distance away. So, and people kind of intuitively know that if you're seeing something like that would be on the other side, spotting something on the other side of the freeway here, you wouldn't even bother picking up your phone to try to film it because it's too far away. So phones in and of themselves, they can help you kind of communicate it, but it's only if it's close range and in daylight is a regular smartphone going to help you. But now, drones are going to make a difference, and the added thing, which is actually, I brought one, we're going to use it tonight on the search when we go out tonight. Good thermal cameras are now pretty cheap. When we first started using thermal cameras, remember back then, it was probably like 15 years ago, they would cost like, and for a handheld, fairly good resolution, you know, thermal resolution, it was like $9,000. And so it was way out of reach for most people, but nowadays a really good therm you can get for just, I mean, we found a way with BFRO to offer one. We wanted to offer a really high quality one for under $1,000. And so we have that now, and we can offer it because we want a lot of people to have those. And I'll tell you, once you use a thermal imager in the woods at night, you will never go out in the woods without one again. Because it's just like because you can't walk, you're not walking around with a spotlight. Unless you're a fool and you really don't want to see one or you want to scare them all away, you don't use a spotlight. So you're walking around the woods in the dark, but you're walking around the woods in the dark, everything, it's kind of scary, especially when you're by yourself. Every little thing you hear, you don't know what it is, you don't know how big it is, etc. But you've got a thermal, you can look and you can see what it is without shining a light on it because it glows, it senses heat. So any kind of warm body lights up like a lantern, and you can spot everything around you, and it makes it a whole different experience going out in the woods. The more that you have kind of the average Bigfoot person, the better thermal gear they have, not only does it give them the capability to record things, but it also gives them the bravery to go out into the dark to try to get close to one of these things, or close enough, get out there where, if you're walking around in the woods in the dark, where these things are walking around in the woods in the dark, and they hear you, they'll come close enough to check you out, and then you'll have an opportunity to film them. So the next step, it's still just like it was in the 60s, it's based on people's ability to get film or footage of them to show other people. And because, footprints, you can get all the footprints in the world, it can be very persuasive to some scientists, but I think what people expect is if there's really some animals out there, you should be able to get them on camera. And most people don't realize how difficult that is. Thermal technology, though, is a game changer in that regard, and it's cheap enough now that a lot more people can have access to it. Anyway, that's my take.
I'm going to speak to the kind of like the academic part of it, and me as a quote unquote like not believer, or my belief is it's something beyond the realm of science. Another approach that I have, though, speaking at universities and academics a lot, with the advent of the internet and so much access to it, so much information, that next generation, what I always say to kids is, you have the world at your fingertips, and that's a lot of crap to deal with. And I am always countering misinformation and a lot of the bullying that goes on there, and I'm always trying to raise the bar to both people and academics alike. Check your ego at the door. We all belong to Bigfoot. Nobody owns Bigfoot. We all are just trying to gather information and share the information the best we can. And I'm trying to push back on cynicism that's within academia. I'll say, hey, I'm a trained biologist. I travel the world with 3 guides, you know, and I've talked to countless witnesses. And yeah, you know, if you check out my TED Talk, in my opinion, a lot of reports can be explained. Let's talk about the reports that can't be explained. Let's talk about the reports where people have everything to lose, nothing to gain. You can't write it off anything. You gotta, just because you have some initials after your name, doesn't make you any expert. It's like, well, what happened in those instances? Instead of stalking it, let's open it up and just be more, show a little grace and kindness, and let's just not be so cynical. And that's what I'm trying to push forward. What is Bigfoot? I mean, no offense, guys, I don't know, but I think there's something still out there, right? So, you know, put on your eyes and be open to things. And that's, I feel like, a role that I still continue to play and push forward, and to definitely let the kids know if they want to be future naturalists, to becoming a scientist. You're not going to learn it all by reading a book. Boots on the ground, start experiencing and talking to other people. That's huge.
Yeah, very briefly, price drops in technology. The more people with suitable technology, the better, because, you know, there's only a handful of Bigfooters that are really out in the woods trying to do anything, really, in my opinion. A handful, very small handful. The rest of them are on the internet trying to end the world, as far as I can tell with misinformation. Those handful of people, but those handful of people, like, the odds are against them. But when, I mean, I'll venture a guess and say almost everybody here has a smartphone in your pocket. The odds are way in your favor than Bigfooters getting footage. And so that's it. The more people with decent technology, because lightning will strike again, and there will be another Patterson-Gimlin film at some point, and the more people with the opportunity to film it, the higher the chances. So that's the important part. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Layla.
Hey guys, I'm Charlie Sanzone's dad. That's about enough for me, but here's a philosophical question. So because our race hasn't had the best track record at preserving intelligent species like whales or the Fort Knox story you mentioned earlier, are you ever conflicted about finding Bigfoot? In other words, does it ever cross your mind like, geez, I hope I don't find Bigfoot with this camera crew here, because I don't want anybody else to know that this family unit is here and maybe we'll ruin their society?
Not for me personally, no, because I'm trying to learn about them. I'm not trying to prove the species is real, because at the end of the day, proof will only come in the form of a dead one. And I'm not and you know, it's naive to think otherwise. DNA will not cut it. Nothing else will matter. If we get good DNA results, then what that'll do is get more people out there with guns and try to bring in a specimen. There are only 2 species so far that don't have a type specimen or a holotype, and humans are one of them, although it's arguably Linnaeus, the guy who invented the taxonomic system. And there's also a species of monkey that was deemed too, from what I understand, I could be incorrect, maybe there's another one now, I've read something, but there's a species of monkey that was deemed too rare to even sacrifice one. Sasquatches aren't. I don't think there's any reason to think that they're endangered at this point. But even DNA results will just push the ball further down the court, but it won't score a touchdown. So I am personally not trying to prove they're real. I can't, because I'm not a gun guy. I have a couple of firearms, but I'm not a gun guy, and I know that because I know gun guys. And several of my friends are gun guys, and that's not me. You know, they're just too into it. It's kind of, you know, just like I'm too into Bigfoot for them. But I am trying to do something for them in the long run. I'm trying to educate. I was a 5th grade teacher before I was on the show, and really what I am now is a single subject teacher. My subject is Bigfoot. Because if we look at all the atrocities that our species has accomplished, if that's the right word for it, all the atrocities that we have committed, that's a better word for it, it's always born out of ignorance. And you know, when you look at the Bigfoot movies today, they're all monstrous. You look at the Finding Bigfoot thing, like and before and after commercials, they're always depicted as such, instead of the quiet, peaceful great apes that they almost certainly are. You know, and maybe they're hominins, maybe they're offshoots of human. Who knows? Who knows what they actually are taxonomically? But really, we all kind of accept that, like, they're not really like that. Then, and so if I can do my little part of educating the public before discovery, before academic acceptance, because Bender Nagel argued, if you read his book, that the discovery process is underway. But before academic acceptance, if I can do my little part of educating the public, perhaps they won't be treated so inappropriately after academic acceptance. Basically, I'm trying to soften the blow of discovery. So I guess there's a way like, well, I don't want the Bigfoots over at this spot to be figured out that they're there because people could bother them. But it's not going to be any easier to kill one after academic acceptance. Bigfoots do a really good job taking care of themselves. I think that's clear at this point. I'm not too worried about it, and I just try to approach the species with the same respect that I would approach a brown bear or anything else. Don't bother them. I'm just trying to learn, man. I'm just visiting, passing through. Don't mind me,
And I think academic acceptance is not going to protect the species or planet or habitat, because a record has shown, based on our atrocities, humans, we are especially increasingly a consumerist, capitalistic society. It goes beyond anything, and it's appalling, but it's a fact of what we are. It's what we have prioritized, sadly.
I'll make it. There's 3 different points I want to make on this issue. I don't think academic acceptance is going to put them in any more danger than they would be now. There's plenty of people out there now who believe that these things are real or could be real, and there really isn't that many people out there, hardly, I think the only people, let's say very few, people who are actively wanting to go out and hunt down and shoot one at present. So the fact that scientists now would suddenly say, oh yeah, we think they're real, that number is not suddenly going to go up. And I think that's because it's not people's immediate inclination to want to go out and kill something like that. Unless somebody puts up a bounty and saying, okay, we'll pay you $1 million for a Bigfoot body. Because obviously there's legal issues with that, so nobody's going to offer that kind of reward for people to go out and kill one. And I just don't think people would naturally, if they see these things, they know what they're like. They know that usually they're running away and retreating. I think most people would have a protective attitude toward them. So yeah, there might be some people who have a bad attitude toward them, but there'd have to be a whole lot of them, and they have to be very organized, and they'd have to be very well funded, and it'd take an army to do it. Because you compare it to whales. Whales are easy to get compared to these things. A whale, you can see them spout with the thing from a distance, and you can get over them, and they have to come up. They're, whales are easy to spot, easy to catch compared to these things. These things are all about getting away, and they're at night, and they can move away from you faster. So, if it's almost impossible to get them on camera, it isn't any easier to shoot one, because you still have to see it to do either of those things. So those were 2 points about it. Oh yeah, okay, and the other example, the Patterson footage. The Patterson footage, lots of people saw that. Lots of people think that's real. Everybody knows, it doesn't take too long to find out exactly where that thing was seen. Not just Bluff Creek, but the part of Bluff Creek. And there was never people going up there trying to hunt that. So, and here's something, a visual representation that blew people's minds. So scientists coming out and saying, yeah, we think Bigfoots are real, or yeah, here's a dead body. For that to somehow then jump to all of a sudden there being a big organized push to kill another one somewhere else where they're known to be, I just don't think that's going to happen. And it hasn't happened in the past. Everybody knows where the Patterson footage is from. You didn't have a mercenary posse up there looking for that one.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Hello, Mike Madden from Pennsylvania. It's not a question, it's just more of a thank you. Thank you for the show. I know you got the show almost quit with the whole horse incident on the very first season. You guys almost ran out of the show. I thank you for not doing that. There was no good show on TV that did any of that stuff. Monster Quest ended some time ago, Animal X long before that, and I had nothing good going on. and I was sitting in my basement, and all of a sudden, I see the show of Finding Bigfoot, and my mouth was stunned, my jaw was on the ground. I'm amazed that this new show is coming on, and ever since then, I've been following it, loved you guys so much and all that. New York Comic Con twice and everything else like that. Me and my girlfriend drove 10 hours here from Eastern Pennsylvania just so that we could be here today, because I knew you guys were all going to be here today. And just from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. I'd like to hear my new updated call that I've been working on.
Can't wait for that microphone.
Well, I don't know if I can top that. I'm Carter Reeves. I'm out of Southern Illinois, just right out of St. Louis. First off, great seeing you guys in person. My question for each of you is, other than Bigfoot, has there been any other cryptid that has piqued your interest? And if so, which one was your favorite?
I got an answer, but I'll let somebody else go.
I don't think a lot of the cryptids are real at all, but I think a couple of them are. And one of the criteria is that you have to kind of look at the history of them. Like Sasquatches, you can go back before written history and find record of them through the oral traditions of the indigenous people. And so if you look at that sort of thing here in North America, or really throughout the world, there's a few that stand out, and I think amongst them are like the lake monsters and river serpent sort of things. Because you can find indigenous stories in North America and other places in the world where these things are part of just like the natural fauna, so to speak. Like as far as the indigenous people go, if you want to know what lives in the woods, talk to a native person. You know, they've lived here longer than anybody else, right? And they say they're here, and I've spoken to a lot of witnesses that say that they've seen them, not only of indigenous cultures, but also the more dominant European culture, I guess, that we're all swimming in. I think those things are very, very likely real. And what they are, I don't know, probably giant eel or something. And I'm kind of basing that on that DNA study from Loch Ness that was done by the New Zealand scientists. But if I kind of thought that before too, though, but this isn't about what I think I'm right or not. But I think that that is probably my favorite, because I think it has the highest probability of being real outside of the hairy hominoids. Like orangutans, they're real, confident of that. You know, Yeren, Yowies, and all that sort of stuff. Almasties or Yetis, all that stuff. But outside of the hairy hominoid realm, I would say that the highest percentage chance are these lake-river serpent things. So.
Okay.
Well,
Part of my answer would have been, with the river snake that some of the Indians call the kind of what are probably some kind of an eel species that breeds out in the ocean and that follows salmon up in rivers and ends up in lakes like Loch Ness. Of course, when there's salmon that come in from the ocean, they go up the streams into Loch Ness, and then they go up into the tributary streams that feed into Loch Ness. And so I think these are just some kind of an eel species that goes up there and gets very, very, very large. But the only other one in the U.S. that just kind of, and I remember we first heard about that 1992. I was at I was a speaker at the conference for the International Society of Cryptozoology, which was a very formal, respected thing funded by I forget what the name of this institute was. That was MIT, an MIT guy who did it, and Richard Greenwald was the head of it. So they had a conference there, and they were giving presentations about Loch Ness and about different cryptozoology things. Again, these are total scientists doing this. And I was the guy come to talk about Bigfoot stuff. And I was in law school at the time. It was in '92. And I came and talked about what I was doing in Ohio and some recordings that I had gotten, and I was talking about wood knocking and things like that. And after the conference, a guy came up to, it was a young woman initially, and she said she knew a park ranger down in the part of southern New Jersey who him and his partner saw something cross the road in this kind of brine swampy area, and they said it wasn't a Bigfoot. And she said, "You've got to talk to this guy," and she was kind of describing this, and I'm like, huh? I've never heard of anything like this. So we got a hold of this ranger, hang on.
I'm spilling that everywhere.
Just electricity, don't
Yeah, exactly. So I and my wife went down and we met this guy, and we talked to the two rangers who saw this thing cross the road, and they did a very detailed drawing of it. I mean, it was right in their headlights, maybe 40 feet ahead of the car. And I was looking at this drawing, and I was like, what the hell is that? And it was something that would look, I mean, I guess the best way to describe it is the top part of it would look like the head of a seal from the ocean, and then it had what almost looked like flippers on its side, but then it had just two hind legs, almost kind of like a deer. And it was like, what? So it's got these two legs, and it's got this body, and it's got these two kind of flipper things, and it had come out of a brine swamp and walked across the road, and with this kind of pointy head, kind of like a seal or a deer, and it was walking back into a different brine swamp. And so I sent the drawing to Lauren Coleman, who's got the Cryptozoology Museum up in Portland, Maine, and immediately he sends me back a drawing from a very old drawing from Australia of a cryptid there called a bunyip. And I looked at that and I was just blown away. I'm like, oh my God, that's the same thing. It was just looking at it, and these two rangers were really credible. And these things called the bunyip, like in Australia, people talk about the bunyip. But they just see these same kind of things in brine swamps, which are areas where you have kind of a swampy river area where ocean water comes up, and so part of it's brackish water and part of it's swamp. And I started thinking then, okay, this would make sense because what dolphins and whales are basically the descendants of what had been land animals. I mean, I don't know, a lot of people know that. Whales and dolphins are not fish. They are mammals, and they were walking around on the land at one point, and they kind of looked like seals. Seals with 4 legs. They would walk around on land, and eventually they adapted to be more and more aquatic, and then they became dolphins and whales. So from these drawings, I'm like, this looks like almost like an intermediary, because the thing the dolphins, whales descended from was a swamp animal. And it's this has got like the head part of that same thing, but then it's got kind of 2 back legs where it doesn't have 4 legs, it's got back legs where it can stand up and like walk from one swamp up onto the land and then into another swamp, and then it's got kind of like flippers. And then I looked at some of the old drawings for the Jersey Devil. And the old drawings for the Jersey Devil show something that's like a deer or a horse head, and it's got these kind of things like wings, and it's got 2 hind legs with like hooves. And I'm like, wow, those 3 things, but this is not something that would be all across the United States. These would be very specific kind of brackish water environments that obviously there's enough of that in Australia, and you have uniquely some of that in the southern part of New Jersey. So I think that's kind of another cryptid, but probably the most, if it exists, it's the most rare one in certainly North America. That would be bigger than a bread box.
I think you guys are talking about aha moments. And I will say something, in science, basic discoveries happen. Cliff, you spoke earlier about stepping back and looking at congruency. You also want to step back and let different specialities overlap. We used to think that, the first people in North America came off the Bering Land Bridge. Archaeologists, a geologist in Virginia, an archaeologist in Southwest, and another archaeologist in France. Different studies came together and showed that actually, before the little ice age, people were coming across from France before they came across the Bering. Right? It's it's stepping back. It's all of these multidisciplinaries in science. You start to get the overlap. So I agree with these guys about if there is another cryptid, it's something aquatic. I graduated from the top fishery school that's in the country, University of Washington. I've been on large research vessels, and at that time, so many animals, we're talking circa in 2005 or so area, what we didn't know about white sharks, what we did not know about the floor, the sea floor. We know more about the moon than we do about the sea floor. And the way that technology was, depth tags, temperature data loggers, has grown a lot, but it is still terrestrial megafauna. Most of it, we can get there, right? Arguably, so don't give me a break on this. But what we cannot do for aquatic megafauna is leaps and bounds apart from each other. So if there is some cryptid, I agree with these guys completely, it would be aquatic. And you're talking about plesiosaurs are the candidate of, you know, what was thought to have been an extreme type creature that maybe is an extra, and then just speaking to the plesiosaur. So I agree with you guys on that one. On the same boat, part of the fun.
Just so you know, the plesiosaur idea as an explanation for Loch Ness came as a result of a photo out of Loch Ness that supposedly showed the fin, like the flipper of something that kind of seemed similar to what a plesiosaur would have. Well, at this conference that I was at, coincidentally, in Rutgers in '92, there was the expert on Loch Ness. And an expert on Loch Ness would be somebody who's an expert on all the research attempts that had been done over the years and the evidence that had been gathered. So that makes somebody an expert on the Loch Ness monster. They know everything else that had been tried. And so he kind of amazed everybody about, because he talked about the plesiosaur possibility, and he said, yeah, that's because of this one photo showing this kind of fin shape.
A piece of it, yeah.
And well, a piece of it. And he explained that that photo that got shown all over the place was originally a photo that came out of one of these underwater subs. It was provided to a local journalist, and the journalist touched up the photo to make it look, darken the area around it to make a flipper shape.
It was a perfect example of pareidolia. So you have this journalist that came in and said, well, if we're thinking maybe it was these creatures that had access out to the sea, maybe they still exist and they're coming in, and there's that murky photo, and like Matt said, kind of fine-tuned it up and pushed it in a direction.
I think that's a little bit more innocent than what, I mean, to me it was, I mean, at the conference it was just plain old fakery by a tabloid journalist in Britain. And I mean, we have tabloid journalism here, but there it's like a glorified art. And so, yeah, somebody wanted to make a story that would carry all around the world. All he had to do was touch up that one photo. So at this cryptozoology conference, it was kind of a huge revelation. And this guy did the research to and even identified the journalist, and he had the original photo. And when he showed the original photo and then the one that was printed after the journalist got a hold of it, you could plainly see how it was doctored and how the original one just showed a swirl of a bunch of bubbles. I mean, it was nothing. I mean, it showed maybe some kind of part of shape, but after it was touched up, that's when you saw this kind of flipper, and it was purely for the purpose of having the news story be more sensational.
Yep.
And so after that, like, there's nothing else to suggest a plesiosaur.
Well, and at that time, I mean, that's what everybody was pushing in the early, and this is like circa in the 90s, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So a great example of plesiosaurs and misinformation. I mean, just to touch it back to that. So,
yeah.
But I like the stepping back to cocoon sieve where you're pulling in, you know, brine swamps, New Jersey, and Australia, these two stories, and that's where you step back, tip your ego out the door, collect that, and say, maybe pieces will start falling together.
Yeah, and witness drawings, that's why those are important. I think that's what happened over the years before the Patterson footage. So you would have witness sketches, and I think people looked at those and like, wow, this one from British Columbia looks a whole lot like one from, you know, upstate New York and different places. And so before there was Patterson footage, there was drawings, and people just kind of put it together. But that's what I saw with these kind of bunny up. And it was funny because the Rangers in Florida, they had called it they made up a name for it. They called it the squat beach. I mean, I remember them saying it was almost joking because it was a squat beach, whatever the heck that was supposed to be. But yeah, so that thing, and then seeing the early drawings of the Jersey Devil and seeing all those things, I'm like, wow, that's obviously not a Bigfoot, and that's obviously not a misidentified animal, because the thing stood like 5 or 6 feet tall. And and it was 2 witnesses, both rangers on patrol, fully in their headlights, and anyway, so, but yeah, so forget police use, sir.
Okay. And thank you very much. And we have one last question, I guess, for the session.
I'm Dorothy from Eastern Kentucky, and I'm just curious, like, what was your aha moment or that experience that made you decide that this is what you wanted to commit, like, your future or career to the rest of your life, I guess?
Oh, I don't know if I ever did make that decision, honestly. Who in the world would choose this, right? It's not an easy thing to do to make a living on, of course. And but I guess it was. I knew that I was onto something because I was in college. I've always been a weird guy. Okay, I've always been interested in eccentric things and whatever else growing up in the 1970s. But when I was in college, I stumbled across a couple different books that were compilations of scientific journal articles written about Sasquatches. And those articles were written by not only journalists and laymen, because that's mostly who was doing the work, but also anthropologists, Dr. Krantz and whatever else. And once I started reading the actual evidence, after a while, it became very difficult to explain away. Very difficult to explain away. Like, how could it be that every indigenous group in North America, without exception, has stories of these sort of things in their oral tradition? The ones in Florida, the ones in British Columbia, they weren't talking, they weren't trading. At least I think that's a strong argument. Maybe they were. I don't think they were, though. But I don't think the trade routes went that far. But yet, there it was. The same physical description of the same behaviors, the same characteristics. And so it was the evidence. The footprint evidence, that the differences between a Sasquatch footprint and a human foot inferred by their footprints happens to be, accidentally happens to be, exactly the necessary biomechanical redesign of the foot to accommodate a mass of that size. And you just go down the list, there's evidence and evidence and evidence and evidence. And I found it overwhelming, extraordinarily compelling. And I also was an amateur astronomer, and that's important because amateur astronomers make a significant contribution to professional astronomers every year. Amateur astronomers are the ones that discover the vast majority of new comets, for example, or even new asteroids, because professionals have to vie for grant money and telescope time, and they have a specific agenda because that's what they get paid for. And there's people like me, the amateurs, that can go dick around with a telescope at night, basically, you know? And we are the ones that stumble upon things. And I saw that Sasquatches, since the academics had not picked up the baton yet, for the most part, this is a field that amateurs like myself can make a significant contribution to. And that's when I decided, holy crap, not only are these things most likely real, besides being cool and eccentric and wacky and all that stuff that I was and am, but I might be able to contribute something important. And I thought that was cool. So that was back in 94, 93, 94, somewhere in there, and that's kind of what got me on this whole train. And after that, it's just one divine accident after another, just stumbling blindly into the dark and scrambling up the metaphoric slopes and, you know, meeting the right people and just falling into one fortuitous snake pit after another and crawling out, you know, and then lo and behold, I accidentally find myself on stage in front of you lovely people talking about this. You know, my life has been one amazing accident. Yeah.
I know we don't have much time, so I'm going to try to put it in a nutshell. The two big aha things for me, I was still at UCLA and found out I was interested since I was a kid, since seeing the documentaries in the 70s, The Legend of Boggy Creek and Mysterious Monsters, saw it as a double feature. I'm sure there's some people in here that got their start too. Legend of Boggy Creek, let's see those hands. If that was the first thing that got you interested, yeah, you're not youngsters, are you? So that got me interested, and then it was like 10 years later that I met some people by chance in LA who had said, a guy who knew some people who had seen one up at the Ventura County Mountains, which is just north of LA. And I was just all over it. I'm like, if there's even a little possibility that there's some up at the Ventura County Mountains, I'm all over it. So I found somebody who would go backpacking up there anyway, and the Ventura County Mountains, it's like most of it you can only backpack into. There are no roads. We went back up there and found tracks. And it was the first time I heard wood knocks, and nobody had ever talked about. I had never heard anybody talk about specifically wood knocks, and we didn't know what the sound was. We heard something making the sound of knocks, and then something up the canyon answering it. But finding the track up there was Fresh Track was another, like, that just totally hooked me. And then the thing that just changed everything was pursuing reports in Ohio, that finally having one standing right in front of me until, and you know, at nighttime growling at me until I walked away from it. That's when I started up the BFRO after that. And that was right when the internet was new, and created a website. And then the people who were on the first group on the internet, this was, remember, years before Facebook, years before MySpace or anything like that, there was only what was called a listserv back then, which was a thing where if you sent an email, you could subscribe to this, and there was a particular email address, and if you were on this list and you sent a message to that email address, then it would bounce back to everybody else who had subscribed. And so all the people who were Bigfooters who were getting online were hearing about this listserv. So from that listserv, we were bringing people into the BFRO, and that's how it grew. But yeah, that face-to-face, it was after that, it lifted a huge burden off me, because even if you find tracks and you hear them and you talk to all sorts of witnesses, you're still gonna have a little bit of doubt that this could all be real until you actually see one. And then once you have an encounter, then it's just like, you never have to have that, maybe they're not really real. And maybe it's all, maybe you could think of all these other explanations for it, because a lot of things just don't kind of make sense. After you pursue them for a while, then it all makes sense. It makes sense why nobody's found bodies of them. It makes sense why people don't have clear photographs of them. Why this has all these things that so many people expect, because all these things that would happen with other animals. There's lots of trail cam photos of other animals. There's lots of regular photographs of other animals. They'll find roadkill, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's all these assumptions made that all of this stuff would apply to Bigfoots too. Well, if you pursue them for years in the places where they live, you understand why those things don't apply. And so that combined with face-to-face, I was just kind of all in, and everything else kind of happened from that.
I have to say, I love what you were saying out there, Frank. I love what you were saying about citizen science, Cliff, and there's a pushback for that, and that's something we have on the internet, and that's a great revelation. I wanted to touch on that. But my aha moment, of course, comes with these guys, it's with Bigfoot, but mine comes with where it's beyond what my belief system is. When we filmed in Alaska, I had done field work there prior, before the show, and I knew these elders and tribal members. And meeting one explaining to me, hearing again and again, Cliff, I know you speak of how it's a part of their culture and their lore, and for me what that speaks to is, it's also often a part of indigenous people's story, is that it is something that is beyond the physical realm, hence the beyond statement. For me, that explains why we don't get a holotype, why we can't find a body, why they can't be seen by members of it running out in the distance. You get a glimpse of it running through the forest where it's a sasquatch or a bookworm, what they're calling it. Then shapeshifts into an elk that turns into a crow and flies off. And I remember Cliff, Matt, and Bobo saying to me, well, that's not real scientific for today. And you having that belief system. Well, I'm somebody who believes in a higher power. Call it a soul, call it spirit, what you will. I believe that when my time comes, my body's going to return to the earth, but my spirit's going somewhere else. I don't know where that is. And when an elder turned to me and said, look, if you look at a totem, there's bear, wolf, raven, and these are animals just like we are. We have a physical and spiritual body that's left in this plane. Our body dies. It goes back to the earth. Our spirit goes somewhere else. But Bigfoot, Bobo, Wendigo, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, can come and go at will. You're never going to touch it. That's what was my aha moment. That's what resonated with me. I don't know what it is. That's a potential explanation, but again, zero the data point. I'm still searching, and I love doing it with these three guys, Bobo included.
All right, we've got one more favor to ask of you before we wrap up. So obviously, 3 of the 4 are here, right? And so Bobo is going to hear this. And so maybe at the count of 3, if we could all say at the top of our lungs, we miss you, Bobo. You think we could do that? Because he's going to hear this podcast. So 1, 2, 3. We miss you, Bobo! Thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much for participating in a Bigfoot and Beyond. Keep it squatchy.